Hi everyone, I thought I'd let you know what I've been up to this year. So here we go, here's a video about my garden project so far. Back in February I bought a house and it came with this garden, and it just seemed a little bit bland and plain, and as a result I decided I was going to make some changes, and that seemed to balloon into a much larger project. I'll start by saying the garden is northeast facing, which means that by midday the patio by the house starts to go into shade. So one of the things I wanted was a patio or somewhere to be able to sit further up in the garden that actually caught the sun during the end of the day. I also wanted a veg bed so I could grow some of my own veg and fruit, and I was initially going to put that quite close to the house and basically extend the retaining wall that you can see there, because one of the big issues that this garden has is that there's a random slope right down at the end of the grass which seems to drop off by a good foot over the course of 2 feet, which is just a bit bizarre and extremely annoying when you're trying to mow the lawn. I also wanted a shed so that I could store my bike in the shed rather than in the house. And I also found that the path that ran around the garden seemed to serve absolutely no purpose, because it didn't really lead anywhere other than back down to the other side of the patio. It did lead up to that garden tool storage box, but even so, that just didn't seem to sort of make much sense. I foolishly decided to put the shed in the top right hand corner, so I prepared an area ready to put a base down for the shed, and then realised that was the perfect location for a patio, so that was a bit of wasted effort. I also decided that the veg bed being down by the house, while practical, is not a very good location because that area of the garden goes into shade quite quickly, which means that the veg wouldn't do very well. So I then started realising I needed a whole new plan for the garden and came up with 3 of them. The first plan was going to have a veg bed basically built in around the patio that was going to go in the top right hand corner. That way you got lots of sun for the patio and lots of sun for the veg. And there was going to be a central path with a pond closer to the house, and that would be raised up but at grass level, and the retaining wall would be built up higher. But this didn't seem to quite work because veg aren't very pretty to grow, and I figured I'd rather have a flower bed near the patio rather than having veg covered in nets and whatever else it may be that doesn't exactly seem to be that beautiful to sit around. The second plan was a lot more extravagant. I decided that the patio could have basically a floating aspect to it, surrounded by what friends then described as a moat, which actually sounds quite cool, but basically a single channel of water that went around the 2 sides of the patio with stepping stones to go across. There would also be 2 veg beds on the sunny side of the garden, but a bit close to the house, and to try and break up the fact that the access onto the grass was going to be by one central set of steps. I tried breaking it up so that there was 3 different levels and that you could step up onto those different levels quite easily rather than having a finite path. Oh, and there was going to be a pergola, as in the previous plan, over the top of the patio. I'm also keen to have in both those plans a lower bistro table, which allows you to sit in the shade, maybe work at your laptop when the sun is out, but it's a bit too bright to sit on the top patio. Ultimately, however, I decided on the third plan, which basically incorporates some of the features of the second plan, but has a pond at the very end of a path that's a bit lower, has a central path with steps at one end. Down by the patio doors there's a space to sit and have a fire bowl. still has a bistro area, and crucially divides the garden up into two zones. On the left hand side is a working side of the garden with the shed and veg bed, and on the right hand side is an entertainment area of the garden with grass and the patio. And there'll be a nice water feature at the end of the pergolas that run down the path, framing it, and that'll be basically a waterfall feature. Despite having drawn all the plans to scale, thanks to some graph paper, because I cannot do that by hand very well, I still figured it was important to go out with spray paint and mark up the grass and decide whether it looks like everything would fit in correctly. To really get the best impression of the garden, I was going to level the entire grass area, so it was all one level from front to back and left to right. So the first thing I had to do was hire a turf cutter and strip off all the turf. I then planned on manually digging up and moving the soil to save myself some money, but I quickly realised that that was going to take far too long, so I hired a digger. I even had a friend come round to help me deal with a order of sleepers and unload them from a lorry, but he also wants to have a go on the digger. Despite our incompetence with the digger, it didn't turn out too badly. When I hired the digger, I had planned on using it to dig out part of the path as well as the pond, and then take that topsoil and fill both the veg bed and a patio raised bed that was going to be on the patio by the house. I, however, didn't do that, mainly because the amount of topsoil that we dug through had basically brought an awful lot of clay to the surface, and that clay wasn't going to be very good for growing plants in. Additionally, it took a very long time to get to that level, and the tracks of the digger mangled up the garden so much that digging down shallow parts wasn't actually going to make a big difference with the digger. I only ordered enough timber to cover building the veg bed, so there wasn't enough to build the retaining wall, and I planned on building that at a later date anyway. While I had the digger, I also dug a channel to put an electric cable in, so it would be able to run the pump for the pond and the water feature. The veg bed is large and is designed to be rather modular, so there are posts running through the centre of it that allow you to put canes up or netting up to be used as trellis, or even just put nets over the top of it so you can keep pests off, or maybe a polythene sheet so you can turn it into a mini greenhouse area for some of the zones to make it a bit warmer. That's why it's got those posts in the centre. The shed turned up and I had some friends help me build it. I even attached a water butt so I could collect some of the rainwater off the roof. I also built the raised flower bed for the patio. This is full of plants that my aunt gave me when I went and visited her. They're all seedlings or cuttings, which is quite nice. I was then keen to get turf down while the weather was still warm enough for it to be able to root down, so I ordered a whole load of topsoil and turf to cover some of the larger areas of ground that weren't going to have path or patio on it. And the final thing I've done for the garden is fill the veg bed up with lots of cow manure, which I got very, very cheap, and probably far too much of it. And that's it. That's the progress I've made so far in my garden. There's still plenty more to go. Not sure how much I'll do now that the days are getting shorter and colder, but I'll certainly be pressing on with it in the spring.